So, hello and welcome back yet again. It is hard to believe, given the fact that there is sunlight beaming through my window right now, that according to the National Weather Service, we are mere hours away from an epic snowstorm. I would like that not to be true, but it could be. Hopefully, it's not, and hopefully, if it is, our power stays on. I know it's already snowing off to the north and west of me, and I think they've already gotten several inches. It started snowing there last night. It rained here all last night because we were actually not warm, but warmer than we're supposed to be for this time of year. But no, there is a giant cold front coming through, and I really hope that they're wrong because I live right on the line between the 4 to 6 inches over the next 48 hours and the 7 to 14 inches. But I am really glad that I don't live in Houghton anymore. If you didn't know, I used to live in Houghton when I first moved back to Michigan, like 11 years ago, I think it was. And Houghton and the areas in the Keweenaw Peninsula of Michigan are supposedly, and I mean, I hope that they're just over exaggerating, but supposedly in the 20 to 46 inches of snow over the next 48 hours. They're all under blizzard warnings up there. I'm just under a winter storm warning, which I think is bad enough, but blizzards are no fun. So, yeah, they were saying, I think last night over on the western side of the UP, that they were getting up to 2 inches an hour. So, I don't know how much snow they've gotten so far. I should have looked. But I also kind of don't want to because I'm kind of still in denial that any of this is going to happen. To make sure that we don't freeze to death, if the power does go out, I do need to go out and find my kerosene heater, which is out in the garage, and make sure that it's ready to go just in case. But knocking on wood, it's just a little bit of snow and it's all just fine. Winter, it's very pretty, but it also kind of stinks sometimes. It's a good thing that I love the area I'm in so much, or I would probably object even louder. None of that has anything to do with Around the World in 80 Days, though, because even though they're traveling in about the same time of year that it is right now in the real world, I mean, I think it's like November in the book, somehow I doubt that they're going to hit snow. Although they should, if they knew anything about the actual United States. Jules Verne should have them hit a snowstorm. I guess we'll find out. It'd be kind of ironic, and I don't think it would have been plotted into the book, but I'm just thinking going from San Francisco, where they're going to be landing, to New York, that means you have to cross the mountains, and that means that you have to like take a train through the mountains, and it would be kind of funny and frustrate Mr. Fogg's plans to no end to get stuck in a mountain pass in the Rockies. I doubt it's going to happen. I doubt this is going to turn into a recreation of the Donner Party. That doesn't seem to be Jules Verne's shtick. If it was Stephen King, that's entirely what would happen. But I guess we're going to find out what's going on because we have almost arrived on the shores of the United States in our book. So we'll see what we get. I am going to record tomorrow night's video today, so you will see me in this exact same outfit, mostly because with this snowstorm, I don't know if we're going to have power. I'm going to cross my fingers that we do, but just in case, I'm going to get this recorded. So we're going to begin with chapter 25 of Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne, which is titled, In Which a Slight Glimpse is Had of San Francisco. It was 7 in the morning when Mr. Fogg, Aouda, and Passepartout set foot upon the American continent, if this name can be given to the floating quay upon which they disembarked. These quays, rising and falling with the tide, thus facilitate the loading and unloading of vessels. Alongside them were clippers of all sizes, steamers of all nationalities, and the steamboats with several decks rising one above the other, which ply on the Sacramento River and its tributaries. There were also heaped up the products of a commerce which extends to Mexico, Chile, Peru, Brazil, Europe, Asia, and all of the Pacific Islands. Passepartout, in his joy on reaching at last the American continent, thought that he would manifest it by executing a perilous vault in fine style, but, tumbling upon some worm-eaten planks, fell through them. Put out of countenance by the manner in which he thus set foot in the New World, he uttered a loud cry which so frightened the innumerable cormorants and pelicans that are always perched on these movable quays that they all flew noisily away. Mr. Fogg, upon reaching the shore, proceeded to find out at what hour the first train left for New York, and learned that this was at 6 o'clock p.m. He had therefore an entire day to spend in the California capital. Taking a carriage at a charge of $3, he and Aouda entered it, while Passepartout mounted on the box beside the driver, and they set out for the International Hotel. From his exalted position, Passepartout observed with much curiosity the wide streets, the low, evenly ranged houses, the Gothic churches, the great docks, the palatial wooden and brick warehouses, the numerous conveyances, both omnibuses, horse cars, and upon the sidewalks not just Americans and Europeans, but people of many other nations. Passepartout was surprised at everything he saw. San Francisco was no longer the legendary city of 1849, a city of bandits, assassins, and incendiaries who had flocked hither in crowds in pursuit of plunder, a paradise for outlaws, where they had gambled with gold dust, with a revolver in one hand and a bowie knife in the other. Now, it was a great commercial emporium. The lofty tower of its city hall overlooked the whole panorama of the streets and avenues, which cut each other at right angles, and in the midst of which appeared pleasant verdant squares, while beyond appeared the Chinese quarter, seemingly imported from the Celestial Empire in a smaller version. Sombreros and people in red shirts and plumed Indians, the past people, were rarely to be seen, but there were silk hats and black coats everywhere, worn by a multitude of nervously active, gentlemanly-looking men. Some of the streets, especially Montgomery Street, which is to San Francisco what Regent Street is to London, the Boulevard des Italiens to Paris, and Broadway to New York, were lined with splendid, spacious stores which exposed in their windows the products of the entire world. When Passepartout reached the International Hotel, it did not seem to him as if he had left England at all. The ground floor of the hotel was occupied by a large bar, a sort of restaurant that was freely open to all passers-by who might partake of dried beef, oyster soup, biscuits, and cheese, all without taking out their purses. Payment was only made for the ale, porter, or sherry which was drunk. This seemed very American to Passepartout. The hotel refreshment rooms were comfortable, and Mr. Fogg and Aouda, installing themselves at a table, were abundantly served on diminutive plates by a racial slur about people of color. After breakfast, Mr. Fogg, accompanied by Aouda, started for the English consulate to have his passport visaed. As he was going out, he met Passepartout, who asked him if it would not be well, before taking the train, to purchase some few Enfield rifles and Colt revolvers. He had been listening to stories of attacks upon the trains by the Sioux and the Pawnee. Mr. Fogg thought this a useless precaution, but told him to do as he wanted, and went on to the consulate. He had not proceeded 200 steps, though, when, by the greatest chance in the world, he met Detective Fix. The detective seemed wholly taken by surprise. What? Had Mr. Fogg crossed the Pacific along with him, and not met on the steamer? At least Fix felt honored to behold once more the gentleman to whom he owed so much, and as his business was recalling him to Europe, of course Mr. Fix would be delighted to continue the journey in such pleasant company as Mr. Fogg. Mr. Fogg replied that the honor would be his, and the detective, who was determined not to lose sight of him, begged permission to accompany them in their walk about San Francisco, a request which Mr. Fogg readily granted. Soon they found themselves in Montgomery Street, where a great crowd was collected. The sidewalks, street horse car rails, shop doors, and windows of the houses, and even the roofs were full of people. Men were going around carrying large posters, and flags and streamers were floating on the wind, while loud cries were heard on every hand. "Hurrah for Camerfield! Hurrah for Mandyboy!" It was a political meeting? At least that's what Fix conjectured, and he said to Mr. Fogg, "Perhaps we better not mingle with the crowd. There might be danger." "Yes," said Mr. Fogg, "and blows, even if they are political, they're still blows." Fix smiled at this comment, and in order to be able to see without being jostled, the party took up a position on the top flight of steps situated at the upper end of Montgomery Street. Opposite them, on the other side of the street, between a coal wharf and a petroleum warehouse, a large platform had been erected in the open air, towards which the current of the crowd seemed to be directed. For what purpose was this meeting? What was the occasion of this excited assembly? Phileas Fogg could not imagine. Was this to nominate some high official, a governor or member of Congress? It was not improbable. At least that's what the multitude before them seemed to indicate. Just at this moment, there was an unusual stir in the humanity. All the hands were raised in the air. Some tightly closed seemed to disappear in the midst of the cries. An energetic way, no doubt, of casting the vote. The crowd swayed back. The banners and flags wavered, disappeared for a moment, and then reappeared in tatters. The undulations of the human surge reached the steps, while all the heads floundered on the surface like the sea agitated by the wind. Many of the black hats disappeared, and the greater part of the crowd seemed to have been diminished in height. "It's evidently a meeting," said Fix, "and its object has to be an exciting one. I shouldn't wonder if it were about the Alabama, despite the fact that that question's settled." "Perhaps," said Mr. Fogg. "At least there's two champions in presence of each other. The Honorable Mr. Camerfield and the Honorable Mr. Mandyboy." Aouda, who was leaning upon Mr. Fogg's arm, observed the tumultuous scene with surprise, while Mr. Fix asked a man near him what the cause of everything was. Before the man could say a word, a fresh agitation arose. Hurrahs and excited shouts were heard. The staffs of the banners began to be used as offensive weapons, and fists flew in every direction. Thumps were exchanged from the tops of the carriages and omnibuses which had been blocked up in the crowd. Boots and shoes went whirling through the air, and Mr. Fogg thought he even heard the crack of revolvers in the din. The rout approached the stairway and flowed up over the lower steps. One of the parties had evidently been repulsed, but the mere lookers-on could not tell whether Mandyboy or Camerfield had gained the upper hand. "I think it'd be good for us to retire," said Fix. who was very anxious that Mr. Fogg should not receive any injury, at least until they were back in London. "If there's any questions about England and all of this, and if we're recognized, I fear it'd go hard on us." "As an English subject," began Mr. Fogg, and did not get to finish his sentence at all, for a terrific hubbub now arose on the terrace behind the flight of steps where they stood, and there were frantic shouts of "Hurrah for Mandaboy! Hip hip hurrah!" It was a band of voters, coming to the rescue of their allies and taking the Camerfield forces in flank. Mr. Fogg, Aouda, and Fix now found themselves between two fires and far too late to escape. The torrent of men, armed with loaded canes and sticks, was irresistible. Phileas Fogg and Mr. Fix were roughly hustled in their attempts to protect their fair companion. The former, cool as ever, tried to defend himself with the weapons which nature had placed at the end of every Englishman's arm, but it was in vain. A big fellow, with a red beard, a flushed face, and broad shoulders, who seemed to be the chief of the band, raised his clenched fist to strike Mr. Fogg, who he would have given a crushing blow to, if Mr. Fix had not rushed in and taken it for him. An enormous bruise immediately made its appearance on the detective's face, which was completely smashed in along with his hat. "Yankee!" exclaimed Mr. Fogg, darting a contemptuous look at the ruffian. "British man," returned the ruffian. "We'll meet again." "Whenever you please." "And what's your name?" said the American. "Phileas Fogg. Yours?" "Colonel Stamp Proctor." The human tide now swept by after overturning Fix, who speedily got to his feet again, though with tattered clothing. Happily, he was not seriously hurt. His traveling overcoat was now divided into two unequal parts, and his trousers resembled those of certain natives who fit less compactly than they are easier to put on. That made no sense. But Aouda had escaped unharmed, and only Fix bore the marks of the fray in his black and blue bruise. "Many thanks," said Mr. Fogg to the detective. "No thanks needed," said Mr. Fix. "But let's go." "Where?" said Mr. Fogg. "A tailor?" Such a visit was, indeed, quite opportune. The clothing of both Mr. Fogg and Mr. Fix was now in rags, as if they themselves had been actively engaged in a contest between Camerfield and Mandaboy. An hour later, they were once more suitably attired, and along with Aouda, they went back to the International Hotel. Passepartout was there, waiting for his master, armed with half a dozen six-barreled revolvers. When he looked at Fix, his brows knit, but Aouda, having in a few words told him of their adventure, Passepartout's face resumed its placid look. Evidently, Fix was no longer the enemy, but an ally. It seemed he was keeping his word, anyway. After dinner, the coach which was to convey the passengers and their luggage to the station drew up to the door. As he was getting in, Mr. Fogg said to Detective Fix, "You haven't seen the Colonel Proctor again, have you?" "No." "I will come back to America and find him," said Phileas Fogg. "It would not be right for an Englishman to permit himself to be treated in that way without retaliation." Mr. Fix smiled, but made no reply. It was clear that Mr. Fogg was one of those Englishmen who, while they do not tolerate dueling at home, are quick to fight abroad once their honor is attacked. At 6:15, the travelers reached the station and found the train ready to depart. As he was about to enter, Mr. Fogg called a porter and said to him, "My friend, was there not some trouble today in San Francisco?" "It was a political meeting, sir," said the porter. but I thought there was a great deal of disturbance in the streets." "It was only a meeting for an election." "The election of a general-in-chief, no doubt?" said Mr. Fogg. "No, sir, just a justice of the peace." And with that, Mr. Fogg got into the train, which started off at full speed ahead. And that's the end of that chapter, which doesn't paint anyone in much of a light. I'm going to grab a drink. We're going to read another chapter because I was looking at it and we only have about 11 more chapters till the end of this book, which I would like to get finished next week. So to that end, we're going to do 2 tonight and maybe 2 for tomorrow night, which means I have to read 4 chapters, which means I better get a drink. So give me 1 minute. All right, drink taken. And so let us continue on with chapter 26, which is titled, "In which Phileas Fogg and Party Travel by the Pacific Railroad." I wish I had a choo-choo train to put up back there, but I don't think I do. From ocean to ocean, so say the Americans, and these 4 words compose the general designation of the great trunk line which crosses the entire width of the United States. The Pacific Railroad is, however, really divided into 2 distinct lines: the Central Pacific between San Francisco and Ogden, and the Union Pacific between Ogden and Omaha. 5 main lines connect Omaha with New York. New York and San Francisco are thus united by an uninterrupted metal ribbon which measures no less than 3,786 miles. Between Omaha and the Pacific, the railway crosses a territory which is still infested by wild beasts and native populations, and a large tract which the Mormons, after they were driven away from Illinois in 1845, had begun to colonize. The journey from New York to San Francisco consumed formerly, under the most favorable conditions, at least 6 months. It's now accomplished in 7 days. It was in 1862 that, in spite of the Southern members of Congress who wished a more southerly route, it was decided to lay the road between the 41st and 42nd parallels. President Lincoln himself fixed the end of the line at Omaha in Nebraska. The work was at once commenced and pursued with the true American energy. Nor did the rapidity with which it went on injuriously affect its good execution. The road grew on the prairies 1.5 miles a day. A locomotive running on the rails laid down the night before brought the rails to be laid tomorrow and advanced upon them as fast as they were put into place. The Pacific Railroad is joined by several branches in Iowa, Kansas, Colorado, and Oregon. On leaving Omaha, it passes along the left bank of the Platte River as far as the junction of its northern branch, follows its southern branch, and crosses the Laramie Territory and the Wasatch Mountains, turns at the Great Salt Lake, and reaches Salt Lake City, the Mormon capital, and plunges into the Toluia Valley across the American desert. Also the Cedar and Humboldt Mountains, the Sierra Nevada, and then it descends via Sacramento to the Pacific. Its grade, even on the Rocky Mountains, never exceeding 112 feet to the mile. Such was the road to be traversed in 7 days, which would enable Phileas Fogg, at least, he hoped, to take the Atlantic steamer at New York on the 11th for Liverpool. The car which he occupied was a sort of long omnibus on 8 wheels, and with no compartments in the interior. It was supplied with 2 rows of seats perpendicular to the direction of the train on either side of an aisle which conducted to the front and rear platforms. These platforms were found throughout the train, and the passengers were able to pass from one end of the train to the other. It was supplied with salon cars, balcony cars, restaurants and smoking cars, theater cars only theater cars were wanting, and I'm sure they'll have those one day. Books and news dealers, sellers of edibles, drinkables, and cigars, who seemed to have plenty of customers, were constantly going up and down the aisles. The train left the Oakland station at 6 o'clock. It was already night, cold and cheerless, the heavens being overcast with clouds which seemed to threaten snow. The train did not proceed rapidly. Counting the stoppages, it did not run more than 20 miles to the hour, which was a sufficient speed, however, to enable it to reach Omaha within its designated time. There was little conversation in the car, and soon many of the passengers were overcome with sleep. Passepartout found himself next to the detective, but did not speak to him. After their recent events, relations with each other had grown somewhat cold. There could no longer be mutual sympathy or intimacy between them. Fix's manner hadn't changed, but Passepartout was quite reserved and quite ready to strangle his former friend on the slightest provocation. Snow began falling an hour after they started. A fine snow, however, which happily could not obstruct the train, nor could anything be seen from the windows but a vast white sheet against which the smoke of the locomotive seemed almost gray. At 8 o'clock, a steward entered the car and announced that the time for going to bed had arrived, and in just a few moments the car was transformed into a dormitory. The backs of the seats were thrown back, bedsteads carefully packed were then rolled out by an ingenious system, berths were suddenly improvised, and each traveler had soon at his disposition a comfortable bed, protected from other passers-by by thick curtains. The sheets were clean, the pillows were soft. It only remained to go to bed and sleep, which everyone did. All the while, the train sped on across the state of California. The country between San Francisco and Sacramento is not very hilly. The Central Pacific, taking Sacramento for its starting point, extends eastward to meet the road from Omaha. The line from San Francisco to Sacramento runs in a northeasterly direction along the American River, which empties into the San Pablo Bay. The 120 miles between those cities was made in 6 hours, and towards midnight, while fast asleep, the travelers passed through Sacramento, so they saw nothing at all of that important place, the seat of the state government, with its fine docks, broad streets, and its noble hotels, squares, and churches. The train itself, on leaving Sacramento and passing the junction Royal Rocklin, along with Auburn and Colfax, then entered the range of the Sierra Nevadas. Cisco was reached at 7 in the morning, and an hour later the dormitory was transformed back into an ordinary car, and the travelers could observe the picturesque beauty of the mountain region through which they were steaming. The railway track wound in and out among the passes, now approaching the mountainsides, now suspended over precipices, avoiding abrupt angles by broad, sweeping curves, and plunging into narrow defiles which seemed to have no outlet at all. The locomotive, its funnel emitting a weird light, with its sharp bell and its cowcatcher extended like a spur, mingled its shrieks and bellowings with the noise of torrents and cascades, and twined its smoke amongst the branches of gigantic pine trees. There were few or no bridges or tunnels on the route. The railway turned around at the sides of the mountains and did not attempt to violate nature by taking the shortest point from one to the other. The train entered the state of Nevada through the Carson Valley at about 9 o'clock, going always northeasterly, and at midday it reached Reno, where there was a delay of 20 minutes for breakfast. From this point, the road, running along the Humboldt River, passed northward for several miles by its banks, and then turned east and kept by the river until it reached the Humboldt Range, nearly at the extreme eastern side of Nevada. Having breakfasted, Mr. Fogg and his companions resumed their places in the car and observed the varied landscape which unfolded itself as they passed along the vast prairies, with the mountains lining the horizon and the creeks with their frothy, foaming streams. Sometimes a great herd of buffalo massing together in the distance seemed like a movable dam. These innumerable multitudes of ruminating beasts often form an insurmountable obstacle to the passage of the trains. Thousands of them have been seen passing over the tracks for hours all together in compact ranks. The locomotive is then forced to stop and wait until the road is once more clear. This indeed happened to the train in which Mr. Fogg was traveling. Around 12 o'clock, a troop of 10 to 12,000 head of buffalo encumbered the track. The locomotive, slackening its speed, tried to clear the way with its cowcatcher, but the mass of animals was far too great. The buffalo marched along with a tranquil gait, uttering now and then a deafening bellow. There was no use of interrupting them, for having taken a particular direction, nothing can moderate or change their course. It's a torrent of living flesh which no dam could ever contain. The travelers gazed on this curious spectacle from the platforms, but Phileas Fogg, who had the most reason of all to be in a hurry, stayed in his seat and waited philosophically until it would please the buffalo to get out of his way. Passepartout, though, was furious at the delay, and they occasioned and longed to discharge his arsenal of revolvers upon the buffalo. "What a country!" he cried. "Mere cattle stopping the trains and going by in a procession, just as if they were not impeding our travel. Parbleu! I would like to know if Mr. Fogg foresaw this in his programme. And here is an engineer who does not dare run his locomotive into this herd of cows." The engineer did not try to overcome the obstacle, and he was quite wise in this. He would have crushed the first buffalo, no doubt, with the cowcatcher, but the locomotive, however powerful it is, would soon have been checked. The train would inevitably have been thrown off the tracks and would then have been completely stopped. The best course was to wait patiently and regain the lost time by doing still greater speed once the obstacle was removed. This procession of buffalo lasted 3 full hours, and it was nighttime before the tracks were cleared. The last ranks of the herd were now passing over the rails, while the first had already disappeared below the southern horizon. Therefore, it was 8 o'clock when the train passed through the defiles of the Humboldt Range, and 9:30 when it finally penetrated Utah, the region of the Great Salt Lake, the singular colony of the Mormons. And that is where we're going to end it tonight. I've peeked ahead at the next chapter, and it seems like Passepartout is going to get the history of the Mormon people, which is interesting. I don't know how delicate I'll have to be in this next chapter, but I guess we're gonna find out. And like I said, I'm going to read this not immediately. I'm going to go rest my voice and have some tea because I'm getting rough again already. I'm telling you, this cold is just not releasing me, and it's very annoying. But I'm going to go have some tea, upload this chapter, and then I'm going to get tomorrow's done just in case we lose power. Again, knocking on wood that we don't. But be prepared. I was a Boy Scout at one point in my life, so being prepared is good. Anyway, have a wonderful night. Have a fantastic Thanksgiving if that is a thing that you celebrate tomorrow, and I will see you then.